Well, if you're looking for a way to bounce back, I'd say that's a pretty good way to do it. Logging a certifiable blowout win at home in front of the biggest crowd to watch you play at home this season. That's what Pitt did on Saturday night against Virginia Tech, bouncing back from the bad loss, not necessarily in terms of metrics or strength of schedule, just in terms of getting blown out. The bad loss at Wake Forest, a 30-point loss at Wake Forest last Tuesday. They bounced back in a big way, beat Virginia Tech by 15, and all of a sudden they've pulled us right back in. Your Panthers are 18-9 overall. They're 9-7 in the ACC, and with 4 games left to play in the regular season, they are coming down the stretch firmly on the bubble with a real chance to put themselves into the NCAA tournament. Whatever happens, it's going to be interesting. Well, let's get the week started by talking about the Virginia Tech game and the path ahead here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Monday, fun day for the Pitt Panthers as they're fresh off a win over Virginia Tech at the Peterson Event Center on Saturday, 79-64 game in front of 12,000 plus, the first 12,000 crowd that Pitt has played in front of at the Peterson Event Center this season. They had a couple of them last year. I think they had 2 announced sellouts. It was like Miami and I forget what the other one was, Clemson or something like that. But it's the first time this year that they've gotten to 12,000 or announced 12,000. We all know what they say about attendance numbers. I mean, some are true, some are a little exaggerated. But I think when you looked at the crowd on Saturday night, it was a pretty good crowd. It was a loud crowd. It was an energetic crowd. I thought they brought a lot of noise, brought a lot of energy. We could have a conversation about the Oakland Zoo and what they need to really get back to their glory days of the early 2000s. But suffice to say, crowd was great on Saturday night, and the team fed off it and ultimately, I think, used some of that energy to carry them to a 15-point win over Virginia Tech in a pretty good game. A game that looked like it was going to go down to the wire until the Panthers just took over in the final 16 minutes. It got a much-needed win and a much-needed bounce back from a really bad night in Winston-Salem. This is Monday, of course, on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You can find it all on Panther-Lair.com, and of course, message boards to interact with hundreds and thousands of your closest Pitt fan friends. All day, every day, Pitt fans are interacting with other Pitt fans at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. The message boards are fired up on the football side. They're fired up on the basketball side. They're fired up all over the place because there's always something to talk about, whether it's football, basketball, or recruiting. Pitt fans always have something to discuss, and they hold those discussions on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. I think it's the best source of Pitt sports news and the best online community of Pitt fans that you're going to find. And then, of course, our YouTube channel right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That's where we put all of our Pitt video content, whether it's these daily morning Pitt videos Monday through Friday, our weekly live show that we do every Wednesday night at 8 p.m., our post-game shows that we do after every road game. So we'll have one after the Clemson game tomorrow night, a huge game. There's going to be a ton to talk about, win or lose for sure, because it's going to be a game that has a pretty considerable impact on Pitt's postseason chances and opportunities. So we'll be live after that game. We'll be live right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. That way you can turn on notifications and get an alert sent to your phone anytime we go live. So we go live after the game tomorrow night. We're shooting for a 9:15 start. Might be earlier, might be later. Might be right at 9:15. I don't know. You don't have to worry about keeping track because if you subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, you can turn on those notifications and get the alert sent to you. So you know it whenever we go live. And, of course, we always ask you to like this video. We appreciate that, like seeing those numbers on YouTube. All right, Pitt 79, Virginia Tech 64. A great way to bounce back. And look, it looked – so they come out of the Wake Forest game, right? A 33-point loss on the road. Kills the momentum. They had a 5-game winning streak and kind of put an end to that. Not kind of. It did put an end to that. And there was some wonder from me and probably from you about how Pitt was going to respond, how they were going to look coming out on the court against Virginia Tech. They have a good crowd there, but they took a real beating in Winston-Salem. How would they bounce back? And Jeff Capel said after the game he had no concerns. He knew they would bounce back. He was sure of it. Jalen Lowe said the same thing, Zach Austin. But I was curious. I didn't know. And they came out on fire. Blake Hinson had a dunk. Nice little hockey assist from Bub Carrington. Passes the ball to Federico. Federico, who gets it to Blake Hinson for a dunk, like 31 seconds into the game. And then, Federico scores on the next possession in the paint, and then Hinson knocks down basically a logo three. He might not have been on the logo, but he was close to it. And it's 7-0, 2 minutes into the game. I joked on Twitter that Pitt was on pace to win the game 140-0 because that's where they were at that point. And it looked like, wow, that's a response. That's how they bounce back. That's how they get it going. And then they didn't. They missed like 8 shots in a row. Virginia Tech scored a few, and all of a sudden Virginia Tech had an 8-7 lead. And what followed, once Pitt started making baskets again, is a real back-and-forth affair, really, for the next 13 minutes of the first half. And then the first 4 or so minutes of the second half, you had 10 lead changes. It really went back and forth. It was I make one, you make one. And sometimes one team would make 2 or 3. And Pitt even got up like 7 at one point, right around the 6-minute mark in the first half. But Virginia Tech chipped away. Pitt got back up by 5. Virginia Tech chipped away. And ultimately they went to halftime tied at 36-36. After some free throws for Virginia Tech in the final 20 seconds. And it was a tie game. And when they came out of halftime, it was back and forth. Virginia Tech went up 38-36, and then Pitt tied it and went up 40-38, and then Virginia Tech tied it and then went up 42-40. And it looked like this is what this game is going to be, because Pitt then, tied it at 42-42 and went up 44-42. And there was a media timeout, 15-41. And it just kept going back and forth. There had been like 4 lead changes already in the second half. And you're like, okay, this is what kind of game this is going to be. And at some point, one of these teams is going to slip and give up like 3 baskets in a row. And that's going to be the difference. It's in what'll be like a 4 or 6 point game. And I tweeted that, at the 15-41 at the under 16 media timeout. I was like, well, Pitt's up now 44-42. But there's been like 4 lead changes in the last 5 minutes. That's how this game is going to go. It's just going to be back and forth the whole way. I'm not very good at predicting sports. and I didn't need Saturday night's basketball game to remind me of that, but it certainly did. Because instead of going back and forth the rest of the way, Pitt, after falling behind 42-40, went on an 18-0 run. Ultimately 22-2 before Virginia Tech started putting up a couple of baskets, but by then Pitt was up 18. They would eventually stretch the lead to 20, and then it was just a matter of running out the clock. So yeah, it didn't become a back and forth affair. What happened was Pitt controlled the game. They took over, they dominated the final 16 minutes, and they were on a roll. I think they made 8 out of 9 baskets at one point. They scored, like I said, an 18-0 run. They got 5 points during that run from, I think, Bub Carrington. 5 points during that run from, what's his name? Guillermo Diaz-Graham. I think, Jalen Lowe had 4 points in that stretch. Ishmael Leggett had 4 points in that stretch. And those 4 guys combined, Pitt went on an 18-0 run, and Blake Hinson didn't score at all during the run. It was all Lowe, Leggett, Carrington, and Diaz-Graham, with Diaz-Graham and Carrington each hitting a 3-pointer, Lowe and Leggett hitting some jump shots, and just and Bub Carrington going coast to coast on a layup where he ultimately hurt his leg and then came back and knocked down a 3 shortly thereafter. And that was where they took over the game. And it was almost like, it's such a cliche to say a light bulb switch or a light switch, light bulb switched or the light switched on or whatever you want to call it. But that was what happened. That's what felt like happened. And Pitt was in control the rest of the way. And they had played well for the most part throughout the game. They only allowed Virginia Tech to make 3 3-pointers. The Hokies were good from beyond the arc. They have been good from beyond the arc all season. So that was pretty strong. Pitt finished with 10 turnovers. Not a terrible number. You'd like more than that, but 13 assists on 29 made baskets. Okay. 9 of 21 from 3. Not a bad number to finish with. What is that? 43% or so. You get 9 3-pointers as a team is pretty quality. They win the rebounding battle by 14. They, points in the paint, they played it even, which I think if you're Pitt and you end up even, particularly 32-32 as this game was on points in the paint, That was a pretty good showing, I would say, although a lot of those points came from the guards driving, which is a good thing as well. 21 points for Pitt off the bench, although you expect to see that with Ishmael Leggett coming off the bench. Leggett had 13, so when you have a scorer like Ishmael Leggett coming off the bench, you're probably going to end up with a decent advantage in bench scoring, and Pitt had that 21-10. But it was just it was a game that Pitt controlled for the final 16 minutes, and it was the kind of performance they needed. It was and it was the kind of performance in the final 16 minutes, but it was the kind of performance in the game overall as a bounce back from the Wake Forest game. And Jeff Capel and Jalen Lowe talked about maturity, talked about growth, talked about how they handled the Wake Forest game and how they responded to the Wake Forest game and how they moved forward from the Wake Forest game. That Jeff Capel could see it in practice as early as Thursday, and also in practice on Friday, and in the shoot-around, the walkthrough on Saturday. And I think that's important for a young team. And this team, despite having Blake Hinson and the transfers and the guys who were here last year, I mean, Bub Carrington and Jalen Lowe are a big part of this team, and they're young. They're playing their first year of college basketball. And so I think that makes it feel like a young team that has to show that it knows how to respond to adversity. It has to show that it knows how to respond to difficult situations, like getting blown out by 33, in a game in the previous game. Some individual highlights here before we move on to the path ahead. I mean, Blake Hinson, obviously 22 points, 6 of 15 from the floor, played all 40 minutes. He was 3 of 8 from 3, made 7 free throws, although he attempted 10. He drew 6 fouls and only committed 3 himself. He also had 2 assists, so that's not a bad number for Hinson. Jalen Lowe provided 18 points on a tidy 6 of 13 shooting. He had 6 assists and 2 turnovers. Also grabbed 4 rebounds and also drew 6 fouls, which is a pretty good number for Lowe. Lowe was pretty outstanding, particularly in the second half. He was efficient, scored, and like I say, he had some big baskets in that 18-0 run. Ishmael Leggett, like I mentioned, scored 13. He grabbed 2 rebounds. Bub Carrington, I'll give a shout out here. Only played 5 minutes in the first half due to foul trouble. He picked up his second foul pretty early on. A little over 3 minutes into the game, about 3:21 into the game. He picked up his second foul and had to go out. That led to another guy getting a lot of minutes in the first half. We'll talk about him in a second. It's always interesting to see how a guy responds when he has to sit out like that, particularly a young player like Carrington, but any player. When you sit for that long in the first half, how are you doing in the second half? And I feel like, and this is probably one of those anecdotal things that may or may not be borne out by evidence, but I feel like a lot of times you see a guy sit out for an extended period in the first half, and when they come out in the second half, they're so amped up and they're so fired up and ready to go that they end up taking like a bad foul because they've got too much energy because they've been sitting there the whole time. That wasn't the case with Bub Carrington. Carrington did finish with, how many fouls? He finished with 4 fouls. So he picked up 2 more in the second half, but he was able to play 15 minutes in the second half, which is right around where his average is. He averages about 30-some minutes per game. So he was right back to where he usually would be in terms of minutes and rotations in the second half, and he played smart. He controlled himself. He didn't take any of those fouls. His 2 fouls in the first half, one was defensive, and then his second one was an offensive foul. And then in the second half, he not only did he get the fouls under control, he shot 3 of 4 from the field. He was 1 of 2 from 3. He grabbed 4 rebounds, finished with 7 points, 1 assist, and 2 turnovers. But ultimately, it was a plus 20. Plus minus could be an interesting stat. They can do different things. And certainly when you play, you're in the second half where Pitt outscored Virginia Tech 43-28. If the bulk of your minutes come in that half, you're probably going to have a pretty good plus minus. But I liked the way Carrington played in the second half. You obviously would like to see more assist numbers, but I think he was making good passes. I think he was distributing the ball well. I think he was driving when he should drive. He was pulling up when he should pull up. He made some big shots. He made a huge 3 during that 18-0 run. And I thought it was a nice bounce back for him individually from the Wake Forest game when he shot 3 of 13 from the floor. Not all of those were bad shots, but some of them were. Sometimes you take a good shot and they miss. Sometimes you take a bad shot. And Carrington had a little bit of both. They've got these 4 big scorers like we talked about last week. Like we've talked about all season, of Hinson, Carrington, Lowe, and Leggett. And they need all of those guys contributing in meaningful ways every night. And I think that's what they got on Saturday. And even if you look at Bub Carrington's stat line and say, well, he only scored 7 points, I think he was crucial to what they did in the second half and the success they had in the second half. Jalen Lowe said that. He said, Bub's the spark. He's such an important player for us. Jeff Capel talked about how Carrington and Lowe are such different types of players, and they're both very good, but they both do different things. And so having them both going at the same time is huge for Pitt. And so I thought it was a great finish to the game for both of the freshman guards, particularly Bub Carrington after having to watch for almost all the first half. And then Zach Austin gets a little bit of a shout out here because while Bub Carrington was out, Austin stayed in and played all 20 minutes in the first half, which is more than he usually would see. Usually they end up deferring to the 3-guard lineup and sending Austin to the bench for most of the first half. That wasn't the case on Saturday. With Carrington sitting, Austin ended up playing the whole first half. He finished the game with 9 points, a season-high 14 rebounds, and a season-high 5 blocks. And remarkably, neither one of those is a career high. I think he had 16 rebounds at one point at high point, and he had 6 blocks, I think, in a game once before. The 9 points were the most he's scored since early January. So Austin made the most of his time and opportunity. It's too bad he couldn't get another point so he could get his first double-double of the season. But 9 points, 14 rebounds, and 5 blocks is a pretty strong stat line for Zach Austin, who remains just sort of a chaos player for Pitt. He's a guy who's very rarely going to get something in the normal set operation of the offense. He's going to get rebounds and putbacks, and when the play breaks down, he's going to be there to help try to clean things up, in addition to providing sort of sneaky away from the basket rim protection, I guess maybe you would call it. He blocks a lot of shots. He's a really good shot blocker, and that athleticism helps him do that. So good win for Pitt. Virginia Tech, I think it goes as a quad 2 win, which is solid for Pitt. And now the Panthers have 4 games left. They go to Clemson tomorrow night. They go to Boston College. Then they host Florida State and NC State to finish out the season. Pitt's 18-9 overall, 9-7 in the ACC. They currently, as of last night, last time I looked at the numbers, they're 3-5 in quad 1 games. Their 3 quad 1 wins are at Duke, at Virginia, and against Wake Forest at home. 2-2 in quad 2 games, 6-2 against quad 3 opponents, and 7-0 in quad 4. And the question always remains, what do they need to do to make the NCAA tournament? I think the last thing I saw from Joe Lunardi yesterday was Pitt was in the group after the next 4 out. So there's the last 4 in, there's the first 4 out, there's the next 4 out, and then there's the group after that who just sort of get mentioned, and Pitt was in there. That's not a final resting place. And I think with the 4 games Pitt has left, they can make their case for a spot in the NCAA tournament. And they don't, I don't feel like they need a ton of other teams to lose. I think they've got opportunities here. If they can win at Clemson, that's a huge quad 1 win that they'll now have 4 quad 1 wins, 3 of them being on the road. And I don't think that's an unimportant point. Somebody posted on the message board an interview with a representative of the selection committee talking about how much they value winning games away from home. And Pitt right now, not only are 2 of their 3 quad 1 wins road games, but Pitt is 6-3 in true road games this season. And I think that's an important number because, look, when you sort all of the teams in Division I college basketball by road wins, there's teams that have won 10 games on the road, 9 games on the road, 8 games on the road. But all those teams with 8 or more wins on the road, all 32 of them, are outside the Power 5 conferences. You have to go all the way down to UNC, who's the only team from a Power 5 conference with 7 wins on the road. They're 7-2 on the road. In total, there are 8 teams for Power 5 conferences with at least 6 road wins this season. 8 teams from the Power 5 conferences who have won at least 6 games on the road this season. Pitt, of course, is one of them. 4 of those 8 are in the ACC, which, we'll just throw out there as a little data point about the ACC. But Carolina's 7-2 on the road. Duke and Clemson are 6-4 on the road. Washington State and Oregon are also 6-4 on the road. And then you get to Pitt, Tennessee, and South Carolina, who are all 6-3 on the road this year. If the committee values wins on the road, Pitt has already built an impressive resume with 2 quad 1 wins on the road and, the second most road wins among Power 5 teams. And they've got a chance to add another quad 1 win and get up to 7 road wins with this game at Clemson tomorrow night. Not to mention potentially getting to 8 road wins with the game at Boston College on Saturday. Pitt is taking care of business. And when when you get to this point in the season, you're looking for every data point you can find. And some of them are way above my head. They're way above my pay grade. They're way over my head. And I can't sit here and pretend to understand them. But I can tell you that. I can tell you that Pitt is sitting here at 18-9 with 4 games left to play. I think at a minimum, they're going to get to 21 wins. I think they take care of business. To me, the way Pitt is playing, the way they bounce back from the Wake Forest game, I think they win at Boston College, and I think they beat Florida State and NC State. Question mark is tomorrow night. Because I think they'll get to 21 wins. I think they'll be 21 and at least 21-10, if not 22-9. Now, I think if they go 4-0, then they've locked themselves into a spot in the NCAA tournament, or they should. Because if they're 22-9 at the end of the regular season with 4 quad 1 wins, 3 of them on the road, that seems like an NCAA tournament resume. That you won 22 games. If they would be 13-7 in the ACC. That should be good enough to make the tournament. Now, if they go 3-1, if they lose tomorrow night and they finish 22-10 and they're 12-8 in the ACC, well, now it's a little bit of a tougher proposition. Now you might need some help, but I still think their resume should be strong enough. This should be a team that gets an opportunity to play in the NCAA tournament. If they go 3-1 or 4-0, they should be a team that gets an opportunity to show how they can do in the national tournament. We'll see if the committee agrees. But Pitt has control over its own destiny as I see it. Beyond, obviously winning the ACC tournament, you get the automatic bid. I think they have control over their own destiny over the next 4 games in the regular season. We'll see. I can't claim to be a bracketologist, nor would I ever, in my wildest, worst nightmares, want to claim to be a bracketologist, but that's kind of what I think right now. It should be a fun one tomorrow night. We'll have more to talk about with that tomorrow to get you ready for Pitt at Clemson. Huge game on the road. We'll see how the Panthers do. Hope you had a great weekend. I appreciate you tuning in today. Make sure you like this video and subscribe, and then head over to Panther-Lair.com for all the Pitt sports news. Thanks again for watching. Have a great Monday. We'll talk to you tomorrow on the Morning Pitt right here on YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com.